America, the United States of America, the most powerful military force in human history, the nation that had just defeated the mighty armies of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan in World War II, armed with the most advanced technologies, weapons, and intelligence systems of its time. And yet, in 1975, it lost, not to another superpower, but to Vietnam, a small, poor, and underdeveloped nation, a country where most people lived off farming, where electricity, running water, or telephones were luxuries few had ever seen. An economy powered by bicycles, hand tools, and meals made of sweet potatoes and cassava. This was one of the strangest wars in human history, and perhaps a war that may never happen again. Why did America go to war in Vietnam, a small, distant country halfway across the world, with no oil, no gold, no strategic bases? To many Americans, it seemed irrelevant, but to the U.S. government, it was everything. After World War II, the world split in two: capitalism versus communism, the West versus the Soviet bloc. In 1954, Vietnam defeated the French and gained independence, but the victory came at a price. The country was divided. North Vietnam became communist, led by Ho Chi Minh. South Vietnam was backed by the West. To Washington, Vietnam wasn't just a country, it was a domino, the first in a chain. If Vietnam fell to communism, then Laos would fall, Cambodia would fall, Thailand, maybe even the Philippines. This was the domino theory, and it shaped everything. That's why the U.S. poured vast amounts of money, weapons, and military aid into the South Vietnamese government, a regime backed by the West. But America didn't just fund the war. It stepped in directly with massive military forces and overwhelming firepower. Now, let's take a closer look at the military forces and weapons deployed by both sides during the war. On the side of the United States and the Republic of Vietnam, they possessed nearly all the cutting-edge military technology of the time. Over 1,000 combat aircraft were transferred to South Vietnam, making its air force the fourth largest in the world, behind only the US, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. Hundreds of F-4 Phantoms, A-37 Dragonflies, F-105 Thunder Chiefs, F-111 Ravens, C-130s, and especially the B-52 Stratofortresses, the flying fortresses of the U.S. Strategic Air Command, dominated the skies over Indochina. More than 7,000 UH-1 Huey helicopters operated in Vietnam, becoming icons of the battlefield. M48 Patton tanks, M113 armored personnel carriers, hundreds of self-propelled artillery units, warships, aircraft carriers, and guided missiles, all were deployed in force. The U.S. carried out over 1 million bombing sorties, dropping more than 7.5 million tons of bombs on Vietnam, 3 times the total bomb tonnage used in all of World War II. They also deployed napalm, Agent Orange, reconnaissance aircraft, Terran radar, and other technologies that were considered futuristic at the time. In stark contrast, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam had virtually no domestic arms industry. Infantry weapons such as the AK-47, SKS rifles, B-40 and B-41 rocket launchers, machine guns, grenades, mines, and small-caliber anti-aircraft guns were their main arsenal. A limited number of T-54 tanks, 130mm artillery, SAM-2 and SAM-3 surface-to-air missiles, and MiG-17 and MiG-21 fighters were provided by the Soviet Union and China, but in small quantities and scattered deployments. Logistics were mostly carried by foot or on reinforced bicycles across the Ho Chi Minh Trail through jungles and mountains under relentless bombing day and night. In terms of manpower, the US and South Vietnam held a massive advantage. In 1969 alone, over 543,000 American troops were stationed directly in South Vietnam. Combined with approximately 1 million regular South Vietnamese soldiers, their military stretched across the 4 tactical zones, equipped with full naval, ground, and air forces. In comparison, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam had around 690,000 regular troops by 1975. Only about 200,000 to 250,000 North Vietnamese soldiers were deployed in the South at any given time, supported by 300,000 to 400,000 local liberation forces. Altogether, the revolutionary forces in the South totaled around 600,000, only half the size of the U.S. and South Vietnamese forces. Given such disparity, the final outcome was beyond imagination. The United States and South Vietnam suffered one of the most painful defeats in modern history. The U.S. lost over 58,000 soldiers, with 153,000 wounded and 1,626 missing in action. South Vietnam suffered 254,000 military deaths, nearly 1 million wounded, and millions more were captured or forced into exile. The U.S. Air Force lost more than 10,700 aircraft during the war, including 34 B-52 bombers, 15 of which were shot down directly over Hanoi by Soviet-made SM-2 missiles. In case you didn't know, the B-52 was the most advanced strategic bomber of its time. And to this day, Vietnam remains the only country to have shot one down in combat. In addition, 5,600 helicopters were destroyed, along with over 1,500 tanks, 8,000 military vehicles, and hundreds of artillery pieces, radars, and electronic systems. Around 20 warships and transport vessels were sunk or forced to retreat. In the final days of April 1975, South Vietnam abandoned thousands of armored vehicles, trucks, artillery systems, and hundreds of arms depots, all of which were seized by the opposing forces. In total, more than 1,000 vehicles, hundreds of cannons, weapons, and modern equipment fell into the hands of the Liberation Army, so much that they had to be hauled back by train, truck, and even ox carts. According to U.S. congressional reports, the total cost of the war reached a 168 billion USD at the time, equivalent to more than 1 trillion USD today. An enormous price to pay, one that left the U.S. economy mired in long-term inflation, severe budget deficits, a collapse in international credibility, and a society consumed by anti-war sentiment and a deep crisis of confidence. Eventually, the United States withdrew entirely from the battlefield, and with it, the fall of the Republic of Vietnam, a government backed by the West, was inevitable. So why? Why did the United States lose this war? This is truly a question that remains difficult to answer, even for the most seasoned military experts. But here are the perspectives and insights I've gathered from those who lived through and witnessed this war firsthand. General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, once said,
"We have the power, we have the weapons, but we cannot defeat a nation determined to defend its homeland to the end."
General William Westmoreland, commander of U.S. forces in Vietnam, once bitterly reflected, "I had never seen soldiers so gritty and resilient. They fought as if they had never known fear." A U.S. veteran, recalling his return from the war, shared, "They weren't afraid to die."
Why do you fight like this? You know you can't win.
Because if I don't fight, my mother won't eat. Because I don't want strangers in my village.
I had nothing left to say. Another officer bluntly said, "If I had 10,000 soldiers like the Viet Cong, I could conquer the entire world." And in my view, the U.S. defeat in Vietnam was not just a military loss. It was a comprehensive failure of strategy, perception, and political will. First, the United States misunderstood the nature of the conflict. They believed it was a war of ideology, capitalism versus communism. But to the Vietnamese, it was a war of independence, a fight against foreign domination. When the reasons for fighting are different, the strength of will becomes unmatched. Second, American military strategy relied too heavily on firepower and advanced technology. Yet they could not control the rugged jungles, nor counter the guerrilla tactics of an enemy that melted into the terrain. Every inch of land secured by day was often lost by night. Military presence could not replace cultural understanding or the trust of the people. Third, the U.S. never truly won the hearts of the Vietnamese people. Many search and destroy missions devastated villages, leaving families homeless and grieving. These actions only pushed more civilians toward the revolutionary cause. Meanwhile, North Vietnam enjoyed broad support from its population, a solid rear base for the front line. Fourth, America was divided from within. The prolonged war, broadcast directly into American homes, revealed its brutality, its missteps, and its staggering human cost. Anti-war sentiment erupted across college campuses, spilled into the streets, and reached Capitol Hill. When trust in the war eroded at home, sustaining the effort abroad became impossible. Finally, and most decisively, was the spirit of the Vietnamese fighters. No intelligence report could quantify it. They didn't fight for a paycheck or prestige. They fought for their land, their pride, and the memory of generations who had suffered under colonial rule. They fought for the dream of living free on their own soil. That kind of willpower, no superpower could suppress, no matter how many bombs, warships, or B-52s it had. And perhaps that very spirit is what made the impossible possible. The victory of a small, poor nation over the most powerful military force on Earth.